For a while, there were only a few things on the internet able to creep me out. Mostly analog horror and the occasional psychological horror. That wasn't until Trevor Henderson. Trevor Henderson is easily one of the most disturbing horror artists on the internet. Half the time, it's hard to tell whether these entities are drawings or whether they really exist in hiding in the darkest corners of our world. Now, being serious, I'm curious to if any of these creatures, if they did exist, if logic could be used to survive every single Trevor Henderson creature based on location, physical characteristics, and the minimal lore behind some of these images. And, of course, putting them onto the signature we're fuck scale. Can I trademark that? Questions for later. Now, this would turn out to be a lot more difficult than I thought, because looking at the list, there are 45 canon creatures, and at least 10 of them are like massive Titanic-sized beings that I don't even know where to start on how to survive. So this is going to be a long video. Regardless, welcome. I'm Mr.Mirage, and this is a logical approach to Trevor Henderson creatures. Now, even if you're completely unfamiliar with Trevor Henderson's creatures as a whole, you probably know Sirenhead, because it has become one of his most popular phenomenons, being the giant siren-like creature that uses its siren noises along with its telephone-like structure in order to lure walkers and hikers. It often is depicted as hiding in dense woods, dark roads, or foggy rural areas. The most popular sound Sirenhead makes is that of a broken tornado alarm that went viral a few years back because of its eerie nature. The biggest threat around Sirenhead lies in how tall the entity is. If you're unfamiliar, the rule of thumb is the longer the legs, the faster it gets from, hey, look at that weird siren down the street, to, oh shit. So it's a very important factor that shouldn't be overlooked. Along with its ability to camouflage physically, like looking like various lampposts and street poles, and verbally, when it uses sirens and calls to lure you. To get an idea of how fast Sirenhead's legs can carry it, we should look at the only living creature with legs even close to long enough to match its stride. Since giraffes can move about 20 to 40 miles per hour, it is safe to assume that Sirenhead can move roughly the same, and the wiki confirms this. Which, just in case you're familiar with the limits of the human body, he's gonna catch you. So, the only way that I could see being able to survive a creature that big is actually using his height against him, as he would be unable to access areas like buildings with small doors. So, really, any area inside is an ideal option. It's assumed the flexibility of his arms are very limited, because as he may be able to, say, flip cars, there's no way he has the strength to be able to plow through solid concrete buildings. So that would honestly be your safest bet. Now, if you're wondering, well, what if he attacks you in a field or a rural area? Well, to answer this, I would say it depends on the outdoor area. In a rural setting, Sirenhead can easily camouflage, giving you less time to escape. The key would be using logical thinking when hearing a siren. For example, would a tornado siren make sense in the middle of hilly forest, or would a hurricane siren make sense in a landlocked state, or maybe even an air raid siren in a time of peace? Stuff like that. Regardless, the next step would be to quickly locate something you can hide under, like a protruding rock, cave, brush, or small tree, and make sure you are not visible from above. This will make it harder for Sirenhead to locate you, and depending on your hiding spot, reach you. Before we move forward, I think it's important to go over a few things. Mostly, Sirenhead, I think due to its popularity, has one of the most information on it out of any of his other creatures. So once we go deeper and darker into his less known canon creatures, you're going to start to see less and less of that same luxury. Some creatures have full wiki pages on them, others consist of simply the image alone. as the majority of all information stems from the captions Trevor himself posted on his Twitter. For these videos, we will be going off of only the wiki articles, Trevor's tweets, and the visual clues I can deduct from the image itself. Now, with that being said, I apologize if a lot of my logical guesses or assumptions don't quite match the headcanons y'all have about it, because I know a lot of times people will see these images and they'll write their own stories that aren't necessarily canon, and I don't want to ruin that for you guys, but I don't know everyone's story, and I'm not going to go research every single lore and story that fans made about every image. So I'm just going to be using specifically what's in the image and on the tweets, and using that to make the best guess I can. Now, Trevor himself stated in a tweet that there are officially 45 confirmed canon creatures, and since I don't have the work ethic of Wendigoon to make a 3-hour video, I'm going to be grouping each creature into 6 classes, with some honorable mentions towards the end, that I still think are cool despite not being on his official canon list. Starting with the class I think poses less of a threat than they might appear. Now, picture walking down the stairs in your house at night, possibly to make sure your doors are locked, or even for just a snack. And then all of a sudden you hear something bumping around. You go to check it out, but instead of what you were expecting, like a burglar or something, you are met with a horse skull that seems to be impossibly long. So much that you can't even see where it stops. Obviously, you're going to try to run around your house to get away from it, but no matter what, it always just seems to be right behind you, still never ending. Desperate, you bolt out onto the street only to see this horrific entity is still following you. Only something is wrong, very wrong. Even under the streetlight, it seems to be without end. You still can't even comprehend what you're looking at, yet it just sits there, almost curious. Suddenly, you are struck by an oncoming truck and killed. This entity, despite horrific, is the unexplainable Long Horse, and the first of the Guardian class. Unlike every other creature, the ones in the Guardian class don't aim to harm humans. Most of them are rather protective and will only lash out in defense. Now, I recommend you enjoy this section and take any comfort you possibly can in these creatures, because it only gets way worse from here. These creatures are so harmless, in fact, that some of them, such as the Watchtower, will even go as far as protecting humans. Which, I don't know if that's supposed to make me feel safe, but, I still would not like to be within 100 miles of these things. But regardless, I know there are a lot of people that really like Longhorse, despite it technically being considered a bad omen that simply is meant to be a warning of something bad to happen in the future, which still, like I said, doesn't make me feel much better. This class consists of 5 entities total. Big Charlie and Little Nugget are some of the first assumably related entities. It is assumed that Big Charlie, who is supposedly a mutated cow from a slaughterhouse experiment gone wrong, would only be hostile if attacked, or if you were to say, I don't know, punt Little Nugget. This is just the general rule of thumb when it comes to aggressive animals. If it's near something it's defending, like its child, leave it be, and then it will leave you be. Similarly, the god of chickens is supposed to be a guardian of chickens, so just don't roam the streets eating chicken or randomly murder a fuckload of chickens and you should be fine. Now, there is a creature that I almost can put in this category, but not quite, known as the lamb, because it is supposedly harmless, but it can cause extreme psychic damage and blood clots if you're near it for too long. But Trevor himself stated in a tweet that you can actually just run away from it, as it does take a long time to do anything to you and it is extremely slow. But since it is supposed to be another relative or offspring, if you will, of Big Charlie, I think it's important to mention that here. These creatures, since they pose virtually no harm, I'm going to put it at a 1 on the we're fucked scale. I hope y'all found comfort in that class, because it's the most tame we're going to get. It only goes downhill from here. There's going to be a time eventually where I don't fuck up every other word and have to redo a part a million times. Y'all don't see the behind the scenes shit, but if you did, you'd be horrified. It is not fun. In order to get a vision on what the stationary class is, let's say you're doing some urban exploring with a bit of friends. You're in this old, abandoned, what must be some sort of daycare, and everything's going fine until you see a room labeled the Smile Room above it. This room is blatantly creepier than the rest and takes a lot of coercing. Still, One of your friends is ushered inside, and suddenly a giant pair of teeth slam down behind him. You are thrown back, not believing what you're seeing. For a second, the room is silent. No screaming, no begging, or pleading. Your friend is just gone. And before you can react, the teeth eject itself from the door, filling the hallway, slothing its way towards the other two of your friends, devouring them whole. You bolt down the hallway, desperate to get the hell away from there, and it follows you everywhere. Downstairs, through halls, until eventually you lose it. It's quiet again. Until eventually you hear the footsteps of your friend coming. Was this all a bad dream? But the figure shambling towards you is no longer your friend. This is the Smile Room, the first example of what I like to call the stationary class. Now, this class is made up mostly of its tether to one location, and there is a good chance you will not see this entity outside of that location, whether it be a specific neighborhood, a specific building, or just one general area. Now, I know what you're going to say. I'm going to get a million comments for this, so for the first time, I'm just going to say it in the video. Yes, the most logical way to survive this class would just be not going there. I know. But that is assuming that you already knew about the location and that there was an entity there before you entered the building. And since logically, unless you're a professional cryptid hunter, you won't be seeing a giant sign on the door that says something like, "Warning, creepy ass teeth inside." So for the stationary class, we're using logic to escape rather than to avoid or attack. The Smile Room is stated to have the ability to occupy any closed room or space. So the solution to this would be, ideally, to get away from liminal passageways such as doorways, hallways, stairs, and even windows. Your overall goal for the Smile Room should be to get outside, but since it has the ability to fill windows and doors, you wouldn't want to do that, as it could just grab you as you're walking out the door. The way I think is the best way to avoid this is to distract it by making it into its humanoid form, where it would take too long for it to fill that doorway and you could have time to escape. The best way I think of doing this is by going to a place it cannot reach you. It is able to fill hallways and doorways, but it wouldn't be able to fill an entire huge room. So a gym or a theater or of some sort would honestly be the best way to do that. Then once it becomes that human form, you take advantage of that time and quickly bolt outside. Now, I believe we would be safe outside only because the teeth are said to belong to a mysterious giant entity on the other side of a sort of wormhole that is on the brink of death from assumably starvation, so it would be unable to waste energy chasing you down. Okay, so do y'all remember earlier when I said some of these have absolute dick diddly for information on them? Well, the Hokkaido hands are the first, but unfortunately not the last. So I'm going to have to infer that the hands simply are used for grabbing you and pulling you somewhere undesirable. Now, to me, the best plan for this would be wearing some sort of loose clothing so that if and when they somehow manage to grab you, you can simply let them grab your outer layer and then take it off, and then they would be grabbing that and you could then get away. Up next, we have the Whole House and the Whole Man, who honestly needs to be careful before I act up. It appears to be a humanoid creature lurking in a basement with very stubby legs. So a broom or another household item that is long like that could easily be jammed into its orifice and used to knock it off its stubby legs, giving you a chance to then escape the house. Our next entity is a creature that appears inside of the houses of a single neighborhood randomly, but it assumably is limited to that one location, similar to the alternates in Mandela Catalog being limited to mostly Mandela County. Although, since this thing kind of seems like its biggest weapon is a pair of scissors, you could honestly just do the most American thing and shoot it with a freaking pistol. Or if that isn't your thing, you could always just tell it to not bring scissors to a machete fight and then bring the bigger weapon, which obviously wouldn't be compensating for something. The next two I'm going to loop together, as one seems to be specific to classrooms and schools and one seems to be specific to theaters, in which my answer is the same. If you are in either of these places at night, I think you have bigger problems and you deserve to die. And as for the last one, known as the Man in the Red Room, it can manipulate your dreams and coerce you into releasing them from its prison. I think it is important to mention that I hate this thing so much. The thought of a giant stringy thing going through the ceilings in a room lit only by a red dim light is the most horrific thing that I could possibly ever think of. Now, the trick to this one would just be, don't listen to anything it says, because it is specifically stated that it cannot escape by itself, which is why it needs human interference. I don't know exactly how it escapes or what would happen if it did escape, so if you honestly don't care about that, you could just let it go and then it would probably leave you alone. But at the same time, it's probably better not to release a random Eldritch abomination from its prison on your own accord. I mean, if you want to have that blood in your hands, go ahead. Overall, this class is only slightly more dangerous, but I wouldn't say it's quite as bad as anything else on the list, so I'll give the stationary class a 3. Now, I gotta say, out of all the classes mentioned so far, the digital class, I think, is the most anomalous and confusing. And if that doesn't make sense to you, picture this. You're surfing the web and downloading random games off the internet, when suddenly you notice an unusual file on your desktop labeled kingbirth.jpg. So, as you should do with random sketchy images, you delete it. The next day when you're opening up your PC, it is back again, but this time it has become more disturbing, breaking apart and now staring at you. The more you try to delete it, the more disturbing it gets. When searching for help, the only response you get is a single sentence. Defeated King is coming soon. Defeated King, along with Bonesworth and the rest of our digital class, reside from or are manifested from technology. The only solution I could possibly make for this one is to, if you see an image on your PC that suggests Defeated King is coming, simply throw every electronic in your house in some sort of pool and then take it to the dump, where it'll get broken up, because it seems like you always have a couple days before it kills you, which is more than enough time to destroy every electronic you own. And people always say, oh yeah, what if it doesn't let you destroy it? Like, it always pisses me off in those movies where they're like, oh yeah, we can't burn it, oh my god. You're not desperate enough. If you're about to get killed by some demonic entity, a volcano should not be off the list. That's just my personal opinion. Now, overall, it is unknown how long you would then have to go without using any electronics, and for some of us, after a few weeks, it would honestly just be worth taking the chances with Defeated King. Overall, this one just kind of reminds me of the intruder from Mandela Catalog. As for Bonesworth, he seems like more like a nuisance than an actual threat, as once you summon him by his app, he will roam your house and do annoying shit like cut your brakes and knock over your ladders while you're on it. Also, he is known to bring insomnia and sickness, which doesn't seem like it's necessarily killing you, but it seems like it's also indirectly killing you. The best way to get rid of Bonesworth would be to send a chain email with links to his game in the hopes that he will find a new quote-unquote favorite and move on from you. Our next two beings assumably originate from what looks to be an old-timey movie or Bendy-era cartoon, being the infamous cartoon cat and dog. Now, unlike the previous entities, they are only in the digital class because they closely resemble cartoons, thus their name. Now, the thing about these two things is I almost didn't cover them, but I knew if I didn't, I would get so many people asking where they are, as they're like almost as popular as Sirenhead. So basically, the thing about these things is Trevor himself stated that if you come into contact with them, you're already dead. So for me to try to logically survive these things would be specifically going against the word of the creator, which I'm not even going to bother doing. And I feel like there's been a lot of times in the past, like with the SCP video and the Flesh That Hates, where I spent a lot of time trying to survive something that is unsurvivable, and I feel like that just wastes everybody's time, and I should just be stamping a 10 on it and moving on. The final creature of this class is known as the VHS creature. Now, this creature is known to mostly hunt people in the sewer systems, but it does seem to have the characteristics of 096, that if you view its tape, you die supernaturally. Now, for this one, I honestly think anyone in my generation is safe, because I don't know if I'm the only one that's never actually watched an actual tape in my life, nor do I even own a VHS player. It's not that I don't like them, they seem cool. I mean, I love analog horror, but it's just the fact that I would never buy one of these things, nor do I really know where to buy one of these things. So I think we'd honestly all be safe, unless you're really into that sort of thing, and then just don't watch creepy, decrepit tapes that you find, and you should be safe. But the thing about this thing is the creature itself does not seem to be the humanoid running around in the sewers, as with the VHS entity, there are multiple forms, including this weird deer creature out in the forest. So I feel like the entity is the VHS tape itself, but if you put the VHS itself aside for a second, the sewer creature is extremely agile, but stated to run off of animalistic instincts, which leads me to believe it could probably be intimidated with fire, as most animals are afraid of it, and logically a creature that is accustomed to running around in pitch black sewers and has night vision would be extremely sensitive to bright light. So bringing a bright luminous flashlight or something like that into this sewer when you go and explore it, should you really want to just randomly explore sewers one day, would be the best idea on how to survive this thing. However, there are other forms like I mentioned earlier, the most intimidating being the passerby at night. Now, for this one, instead of going over it specifically, I'm just going to encourage you to use the tips from our next section for this one as well. But overall, I'd give the digital class a solid 8 due to its overall unpredictability and the fact that it possesses 2 creatures that I could not for the life of me figure out how to survive. Now, up until now, the creatures have been mostly tame and situational. Well, at least compared to our next class, known as the giant class, that, to be honest, makes me want to drop to my knees and pray. Because when you see these things, it's not even comprehensible what you could possibly do next. These Titanic-sized beings are grouped many different ways in Trevor Henderson's wiki, but they're mostly referred to as the giants. The majority of all the creatures show relatively the same characteristics with minor differences, such as the Wandering Faith having the ability to hurl people miles into the air with its tentacles. But I'm going to treat them all as they are grouped by Trevor as one entity, as they basically all possess gigantic size, and that's all that really matters. The good news is all these things seem to stay away from largely populated areas to my knowledge, along with them being so incredibly big that we would basically be like ants to them. So the chances of them actually coming to kill us specifically would be low, unless of course they somehow manage to sneak up on you, which would be unlikely. Now, to me, some of these creatures have a sense of peace to them, though they are terrifying, because I feel like it's best when they're monitored safely from a distance, because anywhere closer than like 5 miles from these things would be horrific, and I just would recommend you run away. A huge threat when it does come to these would be the earthquakes and possibly even tsunamis that they would create due to their massive size. So staying away from coasts, along with keeping aware of shaking, and if an earthquake is happening, going outside to avoid being crushed by your own house would low-key be the best option. Overall, these giants could be inescapable if they were aiming to kill you specifically, but unless they have a supernatural reason, you would honestly have to be really unaware or asleep for a long period of time to have them sneak up on you and crush you, or become even close enough to be harmed by these things. So I'll put them on a 3 with the stationary class. Now, it's sort of an overall consensus for these creatures to not be in the dark alone to risk being attacked by them, but this class that I like to call the Kidnapper Class specifically is focused on catching you outside at night and killing you or taking you, thus the name. I group these entities by the fact that none of them are seen inside, so it is assumable that once inside your home, they will almost all lose interest and leave. So our goal here is going to be figuring out how to disable or outrun these entities long enough to make it home. Now, there are a lot of entities in these next 2 sections, so I'm going to be going over each one more briefly and more quickly in order to save time. Body of a pig is a horrific creature that appears to charge the camera via walking on its hands because its legs seem to have been dislocated from its body. The trick for this one is to take advantage of the fact that it has no legs and has to drag itself by its arms. You would then have to time your blows so when it reaches out for you with one of its arms and is balancing on the other, you could then use a big item or any sort of weapon, or just kick it to be honest, to just knock it off its one leg and then render it unconscious on the ground. Now, you could either use this opportunity to either run away or you could finish it off. It's up to you and whether you take pity on this thing. Now, a lot of fans refer to it as a ghost pig, but it is unconfirmed by Trevor, so we're going to go with the fact that it's a physical entity. The next creature likely to attack by walking home is a 4-legged mosquito-like creature known as the Needle. Akin to its name, it can move like a horse and drain a human of blood completely. Now, the best way to escape this creature would be actually to make it to the nearest tree and then climb up it, as since this thing does possess a lot of the same attributes that horses do, you would actually be able to hide in this tree for as long as you need it, and I doubt it'd be able to climb after you like many of the other ones could. And since it is specifically said to be elusive and trying specifically to avoid attention, you would just want to stay up there until it eventually felt threatened in that area and then left. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what if I never walk home? What if I always drive home? Would I be safe then? No, not really. As Trevor, of course, made terrifying street monsters too. Mr. Mascot is a fucking 15-foot tall mascot costume that apparently has the soul of a serial killer inside of it. Like, that doesn't sound familiar. I hate this thing so much, it makes me want to scream and cry, because I wouldn't know what the hell to do if I saw this thing in the street, other than just attempting to run it over in a panic. But I low-key be afraid of it latching onto my car and then pulling me out and eating me the second it got the opportunity. God, this thing's a nightmare. So honestly, the only possible solution I could see is to light this abomination on fire using a lighter, flamethrower, or any high-grade explosive. Honestly, anything. Just get this thing away from me. Our next one is my favorite cryptid in this list, known as the God of Roadkill. Because, in my opinion, this thing's design is by far the most badass looking out of all the other creatures. And since this thing is specified to be a deity, the only way to avoid being killed by this thing would be to drive incredibly slow and avoid hitting it or any sort of roadkill or animal in the street, as then it would cause your car to crash. Now, the bridgeworm is, I'm sure, one that everyone has been waiting for, as it is an extremely popular creature. It essentially is an insanely long worm that hides underneath bridges only to jump out and grab crossers. Now, this one is a tricky one due to the unpredictable nature and how big it is, so my best advice for this one would be just to choose areas that don't have bridges. However, if you're going on a route that requires a bridge, it would be best to go with somebody else, so then you could, how do I say this? Moving on, our final entity in this category is known by the Storm Warning entity, which is essentially Mothman with lightning powers. So the best solution would be to wear rubber clothing and avoid metal items to prevent lightning from striking you. So that's about it. You should be able to make it home and safe from all these entities, except, as you probably guessed, by the name of our final class, the horror is just beginning. And as for the rating, this class does have a lot of curveballs, but they're all kind of avoidable for the most part, so I would give it a 6. Being the final class of Trevor's creatures and containing a majority of them, the Home Invader class, as the name suggests, are creatures that mostly will attack you inside your home and other buildings. We'll start with the ones that exist outside your windows or in the areas immediately outside your home, being the Nervous House Guest and the Peeping Tom. The latter seems to be mostly harmless other than just staring in your window, so closing the curtains would be the easiest move. One could also just open your window to lure it in and then slam the window on its elongated and vulnerable neck. You could then attack it efficiently, as it would be immobile. The former mentioned is a massive creature peering over the roof side of a house. It is stated to stalk and can turn invisible to anyone that isn't its victim, causing intense emotional distress and paranoia for all that it is seen by. The only method I could possibly see for beating this thing would be to somehow overcome the paranoia it instills and act aggressive towards it. And by this, I do not mean attack it, because it would most definitely lash out and kill you, based on just how huge it is. What I mean is making insanely loud noises such as screaming, gunshots, firecrackers, or like a speaker with loud music volume. Anything that would scare it away, even if just temporarily. Next, we're going to be going over the two quadrupedal dog-like creatures, being White Linen and the Anxious Dogs. And curiously, they're both shaded white as well. Now, apparently anxious dogs can be nulled into becoming docile via treating them like real dogs, allowing them to let their guard down, so you can either escort it out of your house, or depending on the person, attacking it with a melee weapon or assumably fire weapon. Now, White Linen is a more terrifying but easier creature to survive, as it has obviously exposed organs, so any timed blow with something sharp could probably do the job. Greeting Committee, similar to Peeping Tom, has a very thin, vulnerable neck, so swinging a blunt object at its head would be the smartest idea. Now, the next two, known as the Fugitive and the Pursuer, are another one that I assume to be connected together due to their names obviously being associated with the same thing. And for these ones, I think all you would really need to do is just make sure you do not get in the way of the Pursuer finding the Fugitive. and make sure that if the fugitive is inside your house, that you get it out as soon as possible, as the pursuer would probably take that as you harboring him and kill you by association. Now, the next two I'm going to be looping together as well, as they are both humanoid creatures that silently navigate your house, being the homebody and the pink man, aka the abandoned baby. Now, what we do know about these things is that they're able to efficiently sneak up on you, which in your house is horrific, and I can assume that the homebody has similar goals to the Forgotten Baby, which is to break in and kidnap you. Trevor stated in his tier list that I will be discussing in full later that the Forgotten Baby is one of the most dangerous creatures alongside Cartoon Cat, ones that cannot be survived. The only method I could think of doing is keeping yourself from being snatched by finding places, preferably small ones, since these creatures are both huge, and then locking yourself inside or handcuffing yourself to something, so since they can't steal you, they'll become bored and leave. But this is going off the assumption that they don't want to kill you, and if they do, it would just be easy either way, so you might as well do that. I mean, because there's a 50-50 chance here. And with that class finished up, that would be the last of the canon Trevor Henderson entities. Now, regardless of me covering a lot of entities, this guy has a ton more art that I haven't gone over. So I have a few honorable mentions that I really liked the design of that I would like to state at the end of this video. This creature is known by Look All Ways Before Crossing, and it is a uniquely terrifying creature as it is said to just be basically a bunch of floating heads. In my opinion, its eyes would be, even though the most terrifying part, its biggest weakness, as they are so large. So using anything from a BB gun to a bow or a gun could render it completely blind and unable to track you. Next up, the marionette is cool for a number of reasons. Mostly the fact on how creepy it is that it's just hanging from nothing. Or at least I thought that until I discovered the creature known as the Puppeteer, which is another giant bird-like looking creature that, based off its name, would be controlling the marionette via strings. And I think that's an incredibly cool design, that it has a mini version of itself that it's manipulating in order to lure people in and then grab them. This one, although it is stated by Trevor to be harmless and just a little mischievous, I don't trust it at all, and I would just steer clear of Halloween decorations or things that look like Halloween decorations in any month other than October. Now, our final one is actually canon, but I wanted to bring these 5 into light because I didn't cover them for the fact that they are just stupid OP, especially the Upside Down Man, and the others just don't have a lot of information to go off of. Now, I know I mentioned the tier list a couple times for this video, and you're probably curious as to what that is, and the tier list is something that I, to be honest, saw at the very end of this script, and there was no way I was going back and doing all my stuff again, so I went off of the list that I mentioned in the beginning, but Trevor did make a tier list on how dangerous his creatures were, and he added a lot of creatures that did contradict that list, as it wasn't on there. Some that were on there, and some that he forgot. So since it was just really convoluted, I'm going to make the tier list a whole nother video. If you guys are interested in seeing it, let me know in the comments below, and I will make a part 2 of this video. Thank you guys for staying this long, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a subscribe because I have a ton of good ideas for horror videos planned, and y'all know I do like to make the best horror content for you guys that I can possibly do as quick as possible. Peace.
Well, that was quite an adventure. I'm sad to see you go, but don't worry, this doesn't have to be the last time we see each other. I got another cool video, just for you. Hurry, the video's almost over.